Well,
Yep.
I wish we could start warming up. To be fair, well, welcome to this odd interview in a store.
Uh-huh.
Is it the first time you're interviewed for things like this?
No.
No. I mean,
you obviously don't.
But I was
study
looking
the internet.
I was looking online on videos. Is it normally like retailers? Is it the brands themselves? Is it?
It's everybody.
Everybody.
Reviewers, YouTube reviewers, magazines, at shows. It's just whenever anyone says, "Can I take a video?" Yes.
And you say yes. So you're not tired of it?
I never tire.
All right, that's good. I feel good about that. And then, well, welcome to Super Sonido. You're here, and we have you here this weekend for the introduction of the lovely 888s that we have before us, and you also be introducing them in Munich. That's
in 3 days' time.
In 3 days' time. So, I mean, how you found Spain so far? You thought it was a speaker question, right? No.
I've been loving it, especially the long lunches.
Places just keep coming, don't they? Well, I wanted to ask you, obviously you've been doing this for quite a while and you're very passionate about what you do. And I was wondering, was there anything in your upbringing or during your childhood that you could point at as that thing that made you passionate about music, that got you started in what you're doing today?
What I like to say, and I was on a speaker panel at Axpona, and there's other speaker engineers there, and we got asked the question, what got you interested in hi-fi? And I just chimed in first, right? And I said, I can beat all of you guys. I said, I'm an identical twin, and I'm what's called a mirror twin. So my brother is left-handed, and I'm right-handed. So we were born as a stereo pair. And my parents are just fortunate that quadraphonic didn't exist in those days. But in reality, we were always geeks, nerds, and always interested in science and technology, got interested in electronics and building circuits. And we used to spread out all over the living room floor and just leave it for days as we experiment. And our parents were happy to indulge us because, we were learning, we'd got something that we were interested in, we weren't just playing out on the street or getting into trouble. And so that started everything. But it wasn't specifically hi-fi or anything to begin with. It was just electronics and building video games and all sorts of different things. But at some point, my father wanted to upgrade his music system. It was an old-style radiogram with all in one, and you put it across the corner. And we'd learned from some of the electronic magazines. We hadn't yet progressed to hi-fi magazines, and you were supposed to have separates. So we persuaded him to get separates. I can't say it was any better, but it got us on that path. And then we were given a record player, one of these all-in-one, almost suitcase type things, by relatives, and a stack of 45s, mostly from the 50s. But we now had our own system, and that set us on the path. We started reading more and more, and also photography. Both of us were into photography. My dad had been. So we had those two passions, but hi-fi won out. And at some point, I don't know why or quite when, but my interest veered off towards speakers, and my brothers stayed with electronics.
Or he works for audio electronics as well nowadays, or is that the path that he took? Or?
We both continued in our interests. We've never wavered. We've never lost our passion. So, I don't know, 55, 60 years later from that start, we're still doing it. And but he kept his interest in electronics for hi-fi or electroacoustics, and I kept it for speakers.
And was there something about speakers that would, I don't know, capture your imagination somehow?
I wish I knew. Because this question gets asked often. I wish I could remember that moment that I turned towards speakers. And I don't know what that is. I probably need therapy. might
to find out more than 30 years later. Yeah.
But so I started trying to learn about speakers, trying to build speakers, which is, in a sense, not as easy because it's a lot of woodwork and cutting and drilling, whereas electronics is just soldering things together. I never finished anything I started in those days. It was more about the process of learning about them. I remember there was a popular speaker back in the day based on the BBC LS35A, a company called Rogers, who was licensed to make the LS35A, but he'd done it, a version of it, it was an aluminum cylinder with wooden end caps. And then there was a foam grill cloth wrapped all the way around it. I thought, I want to try and make something like that. Oh, I don't know where to get aluminum cylinders. Can I say aluminium? Can I go back to the correct way? I've been in America for 30 years. I've had to say aluminum.
When I heard you before we were having fun, I was like, is he saying aluminum really? Wasn't he from the UK?
So, aluminium.
Yeah, we could say that again. I don't know.
We
can make it.
And so I thought, how would I bend aluminium into a cylinder? So I got the help of my dad, and we got a piece of aluminium cut, and I got 2 round pieces of wood. And I thought, if I keep rolling it on the garden path, the concrete path, he gets one disc, I get, we put a screw in, and then we just roll it a bit and put another screw in, and roll it a bit. Didn't, as the expression goes, we didn't complete the circle. Never managed that, so that was a failure. But it's the process of doing that I was fascinated with. So then I tried the transmission line speaker, and probably for 20 years, those pieces of wood were underneath the bed in the back bedroom.
All the time.
Because I never got it built. And then I sort of thought I would excuse myself in my own way, that even if I completed the speaker, how would I know it's any good? I don't have experience of designing. I'm learning. That's good. But I don't have experience of listening either. Just because I'm interested in it doesn't mean I've had access to listening to good stereo systems. There weren't really that kind of hi-fi shop in my town. And there was the big box store type thing, Comet, I think it was called. And you could, they sold some decent gear, but you didn't really get a chance to listen to it. So I had no idea if anything I was going to do would be the right thing to do. And at some point, either late teens or maybe once I got to university, I can't quite remember, I thought, I need to be able to measure it. Because measurement, and this, I look back and think this was quite profound for what my knowledge was in those days compared to what it is now. And I thought, I need to be able to measure. So I started looking up how to measure. And looking back, well, that wasn't going to work either because I didn't know how to measure. I didn't have a calibrated measuring microphone. But again, it was the process that captivated me.
Well, that kind of got the ball rolling.
And it got the ball rolling, yes. And to this day, accurate measurement is still a passion of mine because it's the starting point. Right. And if you can't measure it properly and you don't know what you're listening to, what have you got? Right. So I started trying to build measuring equipment. Still never had a good microphone. Now I've got a collection of microphones. I've got about
I bet you do.
30 different microphones if I add them all up.
So question, you've worked for companies like KEF, like ELAC, and you've been in the industry for quite a long time. And I'm going to switch to English to ask you the question, really. So, de todos los proyectos en los que has trabajado en compañías como ELAC, como TEAC, como KEF, ¿cuál ha sido aquel que te ha representado un mayor reto? Of all the places that you've been, developing products, helping design speakers, what would you say was what comes to mind if I ask you what's the most challenging product or project that you participated in? I don't know, it could be because of a technical challenge, it could have been because of, materials that you were using. What would you say it was?
Well, since I'm currently employed by MoFi, I should say MoFi.
Maybe you should.
But the reality is, so I would say 2 chapters in my life. One was KEF, because that was my first real job in hi-fi. You know, having had the interest, I decided that I needed to study physics at university, physics and acoustics. So I went off to do that. My brother went off to study electronics. Then we met together to do postgrad research at his university. But I wasn't in a hi-fi company. I was in the field of sort of loudspeakers. My postgrad research was computer-aided crossover network design, followed by active noise cancellation. And for that, I was building all the speaker systems to provide the noise cancellation. So although they were all speaker-related, they weren't actually in the hi-fi industry until I got recruited by KEF. And that was the start. Because no matter what you taught or learn at university, if you want to be that specialised, you need mentorship from a company that is thoroughly involved in research and development. And for me, that was KEF in those days. And to actually be asked to join them was tremendous. I mean,
yeah, I bet.
Scary. It was founded by Raymond Cook, but the technical director who did, in my days, you know, all the initial development work, that was Laurie Fincham. And he became my mentor. But I had known him from hi-fi shows and from Audio Engineering Society lectures. And so one day I bumped into him at a hi-fi show and I was chatting to him. And then he called me up a couple of days later. He says, "Oh, Andrew, I realised when we talked, you've never been to visit the factory. Would you like to visit?" Wow, yes, of course I'd like to visit. So I made the arrangements, put down the phone. And I'm thinking, in all the years I've casually known him, he's never asked me to visit the factory. Why now? Is this a job interview?
So you didn't know at the time you were getting a job interview?
No, I didn't.
Oh, God.
So I thought, I'm going to wear a suit. Or at least jacket. So I go to the factory and yes, it was a job interview. And we do the factory tour and everything. And it was actually the KEF always on Tuesday nights, once a month. Everybody at KEF went up to London to the Audio Engineering Society. They would give a lecture each month. And it was basically obligatory to support AES. So we all went up to a lecture there, and I travelled in Laurie's car, and sort of the interview continued. But a couple of days later, I get a call, and Laurie says, "Andrew, I realised that it was all very casual, and we've offered you the job, but I need to fill out all the paperwork." And he said, "How do you spell your last name?" I'm going, Jones, which is the most common name.
Yeah.
Smith and Jones, 2 most common names in England. And as I spell out my last name, I hear this laughter at the other end. Not from Laurie, but there were other people in his office, and apparently, he'd known me forever as Andrew. He'd forgotten what my last name was. Okay. Laurie being Laurie, he was not going to admit to me that he couldn't remember my last name. He'd asked everybody, "Does anyone remember Andrew's last name?" Nobody did. So he thought he'd get clever and just ask me how to spell it, and it turned out to be Jones. So I've never let him forget that one. But I remember my first day thinking, how can I be up to this? I'm just me. This is KEF. Kind of out the gate, my dream company to work for. And it took me a while to settle in, to think that I am capable of this.
Did you have what they call nowadays the imposter syndrome, kind of like
yes,
you're
that kind of thing,
you're doing that
me,
job, or it's like
little old me. But he did make clear that I would start in research, because that was my background.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we don't have time for you to learn and make mistakes on the job, product development. Okay, I'm just happy to be here. And so we ended up, I forget how many years, 5 or 6 years in research. But that's what I enjoyed doing. And just learnt from everybody. And it wasn't just Laurie that was my mentor. Laurie had a way of working that if he asked you to do something and you challenged it, he would take on that challenge and you'd go back and forth. And often it was difficult to win because for me, my thought was, if he's got a different opinion to mine, he's probably going to be right because he's got so much more experience than me. But at times you think, but this time I think is wrong. But you can't just say you're wrong. You need proof.
Yeah, you need to back it up.
You need to back it up. And you've argued to the point where you can't go any further without evidence. So I would say, look, I'm going to go and try an experiment. And so I would go off, create an experiment. But as I start on that experiment, I start feeding back initial results. I will always do a pre-experiment, just a rough version to get a feel for what I need for the real experiment. But I keep feeding information back. And part of that was my way of preparing him so that even if I get all these results that prove him wrong, I'm not just going to come along and go, told you were wrong. He's already got some things to start rethinking his position if it's going to go my way, so that by the time I finish the experiment, we're sort of both in agreement. And it's a very, very valuable technique.
But I think that's what's important, having a mentor in whatever it is that you do. It shows you things that on your own you won't be able to learn. And so that was the first stage of your career, when that was the first challenge. I'm learning how to make speakers, and then I get hired by this massive company. One. Yeah. And what's the second stage in your life when it comes to? So, I'll just finish with in the sense that Laurie's my mentor, but we had access to so many brilliant people because of who Kef was and their involvement in Audio and Engineering Society and the IEC, International Electroacoustic Committee, whatever it's called, that sets all the standards. And so we'd meet all these people. So there's in speakers, these things called Teal small parameters that is used to help design the low frequency part of the speaker. Well, both Neville Teal and Dick Small were great friends of the company. So if we had any questions, we could always ask them. Or Lipschitz and Van der Kooi, professor of mathematics, one of them, and professor of physics at Ontario University in Canada. We had full access to them. Peter Walker, who founded Quad, the electrostatics, became a great friend. And we go to these lectures, and afterwards we'd all go to dinner. And it's the lecturer, the guys from Kef, and any other company, Celestion, BMW, or Wharfdale, if they were down in that area. And we'd all go to dinner afterwards. And all the speaker engineers from all the different companies would talk. And we wouldn't reveal secrets about what we were doing, but just fundamental questions. If we had issues, we'd chat. And with Peter Walker, we'd pose a question to him, and guaranteed a couple of days later, you get a phone call. Hey, it's Peter here. I was thinking about what you said at dinner the other night. And he'd just have this beautifully simple explanation for it.
those things were invaluable. And ultimately, Dr. Richard Small, Dick Small, came and worked for us at KEF. And he was my direct boss at that point in research. So I was able to work with him and develop new techniques. So, fantastic part of my life. The other part was when I joined Pioneer, which everybody thought, what a strange thing to do. You know, especially at that time, Japanese don't know how to make speakers. Well, actually they do. If you read the AES journals, all the fundamental research and technology research that they have access to was often far superior to what the rest of us were doing. They didn't design speakers to sound like we wanted necessarily. But technically, they were very advanced. And when I was asked to join Pioneer, when people say, why? I go, you don't know what they're capable of. That if I can combine what I know and what they know, we can do some interesting things. And that led to the development of TAD, or TAD Home Audio, which we started in about 2000. And I was put in charge of the project for developing a flagship speaker. And that period of time was amazing because the engineers I worked with in Tokyo were just fantastic and became such good friends. And I'd always worried, but wait, I'm supposedly in charge of the project. What if I disagree with them or vice versa? And I was told, well, Andrew-san, it will be your decision. Yeah, but overruling them, right? Saying, no, you can't do that. But that never happened because we had such similar goals. And in part, if a speaker is good enough, it will satisfy both my needs and their needs. Maybe what they want to hear in the music is of a specific type. I want to hear something else, but the speaker's capable of doing both. And we literally never had any disagreements. So...
and why would you say that they were, because you're saying they were more advanced on the technical aspects of the development of the speakers, but then when it came to maybe the subjective aspect of it, when how they sound,
they were very advanced. Let's say not more advanced than literally everybody else in the world, but what they did have is access to technology as well, that very few companies outside, and it's not just Pioneer, it's Onkyo and Sony and all these companies. For example, the Berillium that I worked with, nobody else at that time was using Berillium. Yamaha and Pioneer had started it back in the mid-70s. Yamaha stopped, Pioneer continued, but in professional speakers. No one else was working with Berillium as I started with Pioneer.
How do you come about Berillium? How did you decide to use Berillium? How did that happen?
It was because I was given the opportunity to develop a flagship speaker. And what materials do I use, for example, for the cone? And when you look at all the different cone materials, let's take the metals, let's say. Magnesium, aluminium, and titanium. Their properties, the critical properties for use in a speaker, they all bunch about together. There's not one that is significantly better than the other. But then you look at beryllium, it's here. And then you look at diamond, and it's there. So diamond is better than, in some respects, than beryllium even, but not as huge a gap as between beryllium and all those other metals. And they were already working with beryllium using a vapor deposition process. And so I thought, I've got to do something with that. We were going to call it TAD was in the professional field, compression drivers and stuff, and in all the studios. And I'm going to take it into the home, but obviously I'd use beryllium if I'm going to do a TAD speaker. But my concept was do a concentric driver, because I'd been at KEF when we started developing UniQ. And it had already in my mind become my signature. Now, whenever I can, I'll do a concentric driver. So I thought, a beryllium concentric driver, this is going to be amazing. So that's what I specified I needed to do. So then I worked with all the engineers to create that. And my first try was a failure in the sense of developing it. Yeah, everything, you like to be right first time, but if you're right first time, then you weren't doing something difficult enough.
Yeah, exactly. Right? You wouldn't really challenge.
So, I committed. I gave them a shape of cone that I thought would work based on my experience, but from other materials. And so we tooled it up. We made sample cones. We measured them, and they were not very good. There was a big flaw in the performance. And so I said, we need to analyze what's going on. We can't endlessly retool. We need to analyze. And this was the cool thing about the guys working in Pioneer. I said, I need to do finite element analysis of the cone. And one of the guys goes, oh, okay, I wrote a program for the computer to do that. Okay, can we run it? And that didn't show the problem. I said, it's probably an acoustic limitation. We need to do boundary element analysis. Okay, I wrote a program to do that. It says, but it takes about 2 days to run a test on the computer. And okay, so we did that, and that showed up the problem. And now we have a technique of saying, instead of making something, let's change the parameters in the analysis program and say, what if we changed it to this shape? What will it produce? And so I gave some suggestions for doing that, and sure enough, it worked second time round. Or in the analysis, in the synthesis. Mm-hmm. So we said, okay, let's build it and try it, and it worked. It's that kind of thing when you're working with all these different disciplines. Jumping ahead, but on the subject, at one point, at KEF, our main rivals were BMW.
You mean also?
Our main rivals. In terms of market share, being technology driven, and we knew all the guys at BMW. It was a friendly rivalry, but nonetheless, we're still trying to beat each other in business. And so I had launched the TAD speaker, and it's building tweeter, building mid-range as a concentric driver. A couple of years later, BMW launched their diamond tweeter. Now, they weren't the first with a diamond tweeter. There were other companies that are offering OEM diamond tweeters. But let's say one of the first major players to announce a diamond tweeter. So I was in Japan, and I was asking, one of their guys was a materials specialist, not a speaker engineer as such, but a materials specialist. So I said, what are the properties of diamond compared to beryllium, so that I can discuss why we're doing beryllium and why they're doing diamond? And as I'm asking the question, he reaches into his desk drawer, opens up a box. Inside it is a diamond tweeter diaphragm. Where did you get that? We made it. When? And it was like 10 years ago. And they said, and we had it in a speaker in the Japanese market 1 year later. And they brought me that afternoon the original brochure. And Andrew-san, here's the brochure, it is yours. And they gave it to me. The original, not just a photocopy. And it was that idea of all the things they'd already tried that solidified this idea of why I'm working with them. So that was a very fascinating time. And getting used to the Japanese culture.
But you lived in Japan for how long?
So I was with Pioneer for 17 years.
17, but no, that period of time you lived in Japan.
Oh no, I never lived in Japan.
You never lived in Japan,
no.
right?
I visited many times.
Yeah.
And
Andrew, ¿cómo definirías el proceso creativo o la filosofía de diseño que utilizas a la hora de desarrollar tus altavoces y cómo ha cambiado en el transcurso de los años? How would you summarize the design philosophy of that you use in your loudspeakers, and how has it developed during, your career? Or is it a tough one too?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's tough because it implies there is one philosophy. I would say it's project dependent to some degree because different types of projects require different ideas. And take, for example, a low-cost speaker versus an expensive speaker. What I'm always looking for in any development is interesting challenges. Right. If it's just routine, here's this, that, the other, not so much fun. But if it challenges me, it's good fun as long as it works out. Yeah. There's always a time during any development where I start to second guess myself, and will it be good enough this time? But for example, I'm TAD, $80,000 speaker. Pioneer BS21 speaker, $89. Right. Very different, and the challenges are different. So with an $80,000 speaker, the challenge is I can sort of spend as much money as I want, and I can go for the best materials and components. But there's still, which should those be? Because what's interesting is everything always has a price because there's competition. I'm not the only one who thinks, let me build an $80,000 speaker. So my $80,000 speaker's still got to be better than someone else's $80,000 speaker. Likewise with low-cost ones. But when it's an $89 speaker, you're making very different decisions. And you look at anything you can do that costs nothing. Right? Yeah. It costs you development time, but maybe not materials cost. And so there's that difference. But then there's, what is the market? I don't design for a sound that I think is needed for that market in so much. I design for, at that price point, what do I think I want to be able to achieve? What can I achieve? Nothing is perfect. Even when you talk about measurement versus listening, it's very difficult to accurately measure a speaker. So if you don't know what you're doing, you don't get the right answer. If you don't have the right answer, but you're correlating it to what it sounds like, then you can't make a correlation. So it ultimately comes down to listening to it. No matter how vested you are in measurement, which I am, measurement has always been my passion, one of the passions in doing speakers, and getting more accurate measurements so that I got a better start in the process of designing the speaker. So
I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. Is there a specific workflow that you follow, even if it's different projects with different goals, maybe because it's different type of speakers? But is there a particular workflow that you follow? Like, well, I'm going to start with the materials. I'm going to use.
So you'll start with, yes, to some degree, the materials. What can I afford to use? And as an engineer, you have to be very knowledgeable about cost of parts. How much does a cone cost? How much does a surround cost? There was a time when I started at Pioneer, at the factory that we had in just outside of Los Angeles, that it was a traditional structure such that engineers designed and the purchasing department purchased. That might sound a bit obvious, but in the sense that it was purchasing who went out and sourced the components you designed and got the cost of it and chose the vendor based on cost. Terrible way to work, because how do you design a project? without first knowing the cost of parts, so you know which ones to put in. It's not like you come to the end of a design and give it to purchasing and say, find out how much this costs, please.
Yeah.
And then you realise you've gone way over budget. So you've got to be aware of that. And I actually had to fight the system and change it a bit. Right. So I start with synthesis. I've got to have an overall idea of what that speaker is going to be, but then I start synthesis programs to see what kind of size box do I need with what type of tuning, what size of drive unit, how much motor do I need, all these things. And you can do that in the computer these days. And then you'll start building prototypes. But to move any further, you've got to verify those design programs by building something. And the thing about synthesis is you're trying to produce a design from nothing. And they're not always accurate sufficiently from going from nothing to something. Once you've got something, and if it's close but not quite right, you can measure it and then say, well, now I can adjust the starting point so it gives the same answer as what I actually measure. From that point, you can then adjust the parameters and say, okay, if I want to make a change to improve it, that change will incrementally be much more accurate straight off. So you're going to go that process, synthesis to prototype, to measurement of the prototype, verify the prototype, and then adjust. And so measurement is always of crucial importance. And in that process, I don't throw an early prototype together and measure it or listen to it. Because if it hasn't met my design objective, why would I listen to it? Because I know it's not right. It hasn't met my objective. Why am I listening to something that's wrong? It's not until it's got close enough to my objective would I start listening to it. And then I can say, oh, it sounds like this, but maybe my objective was wrong. If it's sort of closely met a measurement goal, but it doesn't sound good, maybe my measurement, the goal I set myself for what the measurement results should look like, maybe that was wrong. But this has to be an iterative process, because was the measurement right? Okay, so let's say the measurement was right. Maybe I got the wrong goal. Maybe I don't want it to be a flat response, or maybe I want it flat on axis, but a certain behavior off axis, and one or the other is wrong. And I listen to it, and I say, yeah, I don't like the sound of it. Maybe my goal was wrong. But you can't establish that unless you know you're measuring accurately. Right. So it goes down to the fundamental starting point is you must be able to measure accurately. And that's very difficult. I gave a talk just, again, the speaker panel that I was on, and that was one of the things I said, that probably 99% of people measure wrongly when they're measuring speakers. So having done that, it also gives you the question, the philosophy of listening to the speaker to determine how it performs. Well, what are you using to listen with? Yeah. Both in terms of choice of equipment and in terms of, well, which particular pieces of music.
Or the place you're listening in.
And the place you're in. Everything affects what you're hearing. And have you controlled all those variables? Invariably, you haven't. And this is one of the tricky parts about scientific experimentation. First of all, you need to establish an experimental technique that's valid. And there's this thing of controlling the variables. If you want an answer to something, you want to change only that one thing that you're investigating, and nothing else must change. But so often, if you don't really know scientific experimental method, you'll end up changing two things at once. Okay,
And
so something's changed, and how do you know what's responsible? I'll give you a very concrete example. I don't use a tube amplifier, typically, to design my speaker. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Now, in one sense, this is not an attack on tube amplifiers. Mm-hmm. But what happens in this scientific methodology, if I change the crossover for a speaker, it not only changes the frequency response, it also changes the impedance curve. You can almost never change one without changing the other. The deliberate change of the frequency response is the thing I'm trying to find out. What happens when I change the frequency response? But since the impedance curve has changed, most tube amplifiers have quite high output impedance, and they interact with the impedance of the speaker to change the frequency response of the speaker.
Right.
So now I've made what I think is a deliberate, specific change in the frequency response to listen to. But I've got an added change in frequency response due to how it's changed its interaction with the tube amplifier. So what am I listening to? So it's much more straightforward to use, and typically solid state amplifiers have lower output impedances, vanishingly low in a lot of cases. So that allows me to get to an answer much more directly. I will still use, whenever I design, I will use tube amplifiers. I've had a selection of them to evaluate what does it sound like driven by typical tube amplifiers. And I might even change the design of the speaker to minimize the effect of that variation.
I see.
But it's still, I have to be careful when I'm doing that design process. So I'm going to, the idea of establish a technical goal, see how close you get to that technical goal, listen to it. What are you listening to?
Yeah.
How do I know what that recording is supposed to sound like? Most times I don't. And, well, then how can you design? And I like to think through experience. I've listened to so many speaker designs in so many rooms all around the world. I've set up demonstrations in hotel rooms and tuned the room in a day so many times that I, certainly with a certain set of, let's say, reference recordings, not reference as being the closest approach to what the original, but my own reference. And that I think I know what, on average, I want it to sound like. And really that's the philosophy. It's what,
right.
It's what me.
Yeah, it's you.
It's all about me.
Yeah, because
what do I want it to sound like?
Because there's so many speakers in the market, and obviously, well, we get these questions a lot. Like customers will ask us, how does this speaker sound? They ask our subjective opinion on how it sounds, or how is it, or predictive even. How is it going to sound with this and with that amplifier? And most of the time, I can't, because what are we going to be listening to? What's the room that we're going to be in?
Yeah.
So it changes. So I guess it's not all technical, but there's that part of you, AndrewJones, sitting in front of speakers and being like, well, but what are you trying to achieve there? The sound that you like?
So I have, it's almost a catchphrase. I have this simple way of looking at it. Right. And I'll get to that in a moment as I explain something else, that we're trying to set ourselves a target of what we want that speaker to be. And from a measurement point of view, it will never measure as well as you really like it to. You want it to have a response that looks like that. What you'll actually be doing is that. And especially the lower the price, the less it can meet a particular perfect measurement objective. So it's inaccuracies that define sound character. And my choice of which inaccuracies do I accept and which I don't. Some people, all that's important is the mid-range. They don't care about treble, they don't care about bass. As one example, it's magic mid-range performance. For me, it's a broader thing, but still, I have my personal preferences of what I want to hear. And since it is going to be inaccurate, even to your objective, I have to decide which ones I'm going to deal with and not. So the character of that speaker becomes the character of my decisions and what I like to hear. And so what I basically say is, if enough people like what I like, I have a business. If they don't, I have a hobby. Yeah. And really, that's
well, you definitely have a business. You definitely don't have a hobby.
And
like,
I do.
A lot of people like your
I've
speakers.
had a business.
And not only they like your speakers. I mean, you've got speakers that are icons in the industry, actually. But how? Well, I'm going to ask about MoFi. How did MoFi recruit you? How was that process? How do you come working for MoFi themselves?
You know, MoFi is multi-faceted. Just like my speaker. And they got fingers in a lot of things. Right? They started life as remastering records and pressing and selling records. But they've also got the manufacturing division, which I now belong to. They also do distribution, importing brands
in the States
into the US. And also direct sales, start off as catalogs, like in the old days. So I knew them initially they were one of the first customer when I launched the ELAC Americas speakers, the debut. They came into that very first demo and said, we have to have this. So established a relationship with them, and all really nice guys. And so many years later, they decided they have the manufacturing division, so they're making turntables, sourcing cartridges, they do some electronics, they don't have speakers. Well, why don't we complete that to show the philosophy of sound of MoFi? And so they asked if I was interested to come and design some speakers. And what's interesting about that is, let's say the more successful you become as a designer, if you go and work with another speaker company, fashion design house, whatever it is, they've already got a tradition of how they do things. Either you agree with that, so you just fit in nicely, or you don't and you want to change it. I mean, you'd have to say, well, why do you take that job if you don't agree with the way they do things? It would be like going into KEF and going, I don't believe in concentric drivers, you have to change. You're not likely to do that, but there's still a way of working a philosophy of their design approach that you have to be mindful of. With MoFi, they weren't making speakers. I don't have to worry about that. They wanted me for what I do when I design speakers. And that, very flattering, obviously, for one thing.
So one would say that you are determining now how things are going to be done when it comes to speaker manufacturing within MoFi.
Yeah, I mean,
because it's
about me again.
Yeah.
It's always got to be.
It's always about you.
It's got to be. So it can be scary. Just like when I started TAD division, I started. That sounds too...
About you, yeah.
Right. We started. Little story here. So when I worked at ELAC, some of the guys I worked with came from Pioneer as well. And one of them, my good friend Chris, he was project manager, let's say. And we'd travel often doing demonstrations. And I'm always talking, I keep saying we. I keep saying I. And at one point, Chris goes, Andrew, maybe you should say we. Right? So we go to this one thing where we're doing talks all day long. And he said, don't forget, it's I, not we. And so, of course, I occasionally forget and start saying we. So he says to these guys that we're giving the talk to, he says, does everybody know what a swear jar is? A swear jar is where if you swear, you're supposed to put some money in the jar. He says, well, at ELAC, we have an I jar. So whenever Andrew says I, he has to put some money in the jar. And once it's filled up enough, we buy him some chocolate. Right? Or maybe tiramisu, who knows? So we're making this joke all day long. And almost on the last go-round, he starts saying this, and I'm busy preparing the next track to demonstrate. And as though this was real, I suddenly thought, wait, all these years, it just means I've been buying my own chocolate. And everyone was laughing at that.
Oh, that's a funny one.
So I've completely forgotten where we were in the question.
No, it's always, I mean, the speaker design, so, well, this time it's about you because you just came to MoFi.
Right, so starting with a new company where it's going to be, what do you want to do? Well, what do I want to do? I have so many ideas floating around all the time, not just about regular speakers, but like electrostatic speakers. I love the concept of electrostatics. As I said earlier, one of my mentors was Peter Walker, who started Quad. In fact, as he was retiring, he asked if I wanted to understudy and then take over as he retired. But I thought, from a career point of view, that's rather restrictive.
Yeah.
But I was still, the idea to fully learn from Peter about electrostatics would have been amazing. However, you've now got this blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
What do you do? And they gave me some rough guidelines, just very simple ones. One was, at the time, 3 years ago was when I started at MoFi. And speakers like, that were popular in the 70s, like JBL, L100, they were reissuing that.
Yeah.
KLH, Wharfdale, all doing, the 60s and 70s style and bigger, boxy speakers rather than slim ones that are all the fashion these days. There's a niche in the market for that, so why don't we look at that? And that could be cool. Big woofers, yeah, I had some big woofers with the TAD speakers, but most times I've been working with 5 and 6 inch woofers. So yeah, let's have a go at something with a 10 inch woofer. And then they said, from an industrial viewpoint or industrial design, we have this mid-century modern theme going on, so something like that. And also we have a rough price point. Of course I exceeded it, but...
Do you always?
No, sometimes. This $89 speaker, this was initiated by Best Buy, which was the biggest retailer in the US. And they wanted something at $89. And when they say $89, it better be $89. Because if it's anything that's over, you eat the cost, they don't.
Oh, God.
So I had to be very precise in what I did with that. I pushed the boundaries, but it still had to be able to produce at that price. But in the case of MoFi, yes, there's a guideline of price, but if, as I'm starting to develop it, I feel that I can put some technology in that I haven't done before and would be worthwhile towards the product, then give me the leeway to examine that. And if it results in the speaker needing to be more expensive, maybe we should do that, because why cut corners and meet a price point and have nothing special just because I've joined another company? Don't want a Me Too product. Give me the chance to try something different. And that's what they were wanting me to do. Let's create.
Right.
And so I was able to exceed that part. But it laid the groundwork of, okay, now I don't have a clean sheet of paper. I have some ideas for parameters to work within. And that's what I was able to do.
Oh,
and the first thought was, 10-inch woofer, but I always like to do concentric speakers.
I was going to ask, was always the idea?
Whenever I can, I do concentric.
Okay.
Yeah,
if they let you, you do it. Is that?
Yeah. If there's something that defines what does Andrew do,
yeah.
It's, well, whenever I can, I do a concentric driver, and whenever I'm doing a speaker that isn't concentric, as I'm developing it, I'm always thinking, I wish this was concentric because of the problems it solves. So, okay, it's going to be concentric and big 10-inch woofer, so maybe a 3-way. And so 10-inch, and then what size of concentric do I do? But I realised the cost was getting up there, especially when you do a 3-way. The crossover is much more complex, much more costly. And so I've always said a 2-way would be a much simpler crossover. And so maybe I can then save that cost and put it more into the driver. But I don't traditionally like doing 2-ways, because one of the things about concentric drivers is, since it's the cone is surrounding the tweeter, if it moves too far, you can start to hear modulation effects. And if it's in a 3-way, there's no bass going in there to produce the movement, and so you're safe. But oh wait, it's got a 10-inch woofer. That doesn't move nearly as far as a smaller woofer to produce an equivalent amount of bass. So maybe I can do it as a 2-way. And once I realised that, I thought, I really have a direction to go now, something to develop that I've never done before, and I can research it and see if it's possible. And that's what resulted in Source Point 10.
A ver, todos los días acá a tienda nos llaman muchos clientes preguntando cómo suena un altavoz, que es algo bastante difícil de describir a alguien. Pero bueno, ya que tú eres el que ha diseñado los altavoces, te quisiera preguntar cómo describirías el sonido de los Source Point 8 o de los Source Point, o el rango de Source Point en general. How would you describe the sound of the Source Point range?
Let's say coherent, right? Which is good because it's the thing about a concentric driver. And in fact, one of the names I've given to my speakers through the years with the pioneer, coherent source transducer, which became CST. And I liked that because coherent from a technical point of view is sort of time aligned, but also coherent from a audible point of view is that it locks things in and everything makes sense, everything plays together. And one of the aspects that I feel concentric drivers do very well is, first of all, the sound staging just seems so real. But vocalists always just seem to float right in front of you, almost out of reach. You could almost touch them, but they always seem just there in front of you. So they feel real, and that's very important, both in the sense of making sense of the music, but also important to me because that's what I want to be able to hear. And it brings up a question I was asked at one time about what do you do differently when designing for a home theatre speaker versus a music theatre? And the basic answer is nothing, because if you think about what is important in movies and what is important in music, in a lot of music, it's the same thing. It's the vocals. I know music without vocals can be very emotional, but when we're singing, well, not when I'm singing, you don't want to hear me sing. If anyone knows what Julia Childs sounds like, my wife says I sing like Julia Childs. But the emotional impact of hearing those words, understanding those words, that's important in movies as well, because without dialogue, you're lost. You know, if you watch a subtitled movie, you have to watch it intently to read the subtitles, because otherwise you don't know what's going on. If you can't hear the words how many times with watching a movie have you kind of, what did they say? Yeah. And you rewind and you go back. So accurate vocal reproduction is very critical to both. And I find that very important. Whether you want to call it that magical mid-range or whatever, but I want to hear voices sound real and present. And there's some of the difference between that, or you don't always get both. But it has to be present there in front of you and communicating to you. So I feel like I aim for that, and a lot of the times on some systems I listen to, voices sound a bit too artificial or too bright without that chest sound. And so I try and make sure I get that.
Like a very realistic type of sound, as if it wasn't a live performance.
Yes.
What I have to say for myself, like personally, the source point, the first word that I used when I listened to the source point 8 was the first ones that I listened to. It was that they're really fun to listen to, and it really dragged me into the musical experience. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is what I suppose everyone's looking. You know, it's like it's about emotion, the music. So you want a speaker that maybe it's not. You don't want something clinical. You want something that presents the music in a way that you enjoy, and that is, you know.
Yeah, I have, from time to time, ended up producing some speakers that are more clinical than they are emotional. It's odd. I mean, I'm equating two different kinds of terms, but they sound very dynamic, but a bit thin. It's that lower mid-range that gives you that feeling of warmth and emotion that you can lose otherwise. So I try and get that balance right.
Did the size of the cabinet of the speakers help you out with that in the design? Or?
So if you think about what does size of speaker provide you, from a physics point of view, there's a relationship, kind of one of the immutable laws of acoustics, that the relationship between box size, efficiency, and bass extension. You can choose two of those, but the third one is going to be given to you. You can't freely choose all three. You can't have a small box that's efficient and good bass extension. So that's one of the fundamental starting points of what you're doing. How efficient do you need this speaker to be? How low down do you need it to go? Do you want a big box or a small box? And what I've done, especially with a lot of the low-cost speakers, small speakers, so obviously small speakers can't have very low bass, but they need sufficient bass for you to understand what's in the music. If you have no bass, of course, a lot of the instruments that drive the rhythm and the sense of the music have got a lot of low frequency information. You'll lose some of those notes. And so I need to get enough sense of that. So when I was designing the affordable speakers, these are generally starting points for a lot of people buying speakers. And a lot of people starting off, both they can't afford big speakers, but they don't want to accommodate big speakers. And if you go for efficiency, there's no bass. Well, you can fix that with a subwoofer, but then you're asking to spend more money. And the complication for someone new to the hobby, they don't know how to integrate a subwoofer. Yeah. Most people don't. That's supposed to be my job. I'm supposed to be blending the drivers together. Whereas with subwoofers, we go, you'll have a go. See how good you are. So I want to give sufficient bass in affordable speakers. And to do that, I've got to give up something. And if we've already decided that it can't be bigger than a certain size box, then I have to give up efficiency. And so often I'll be presented, people say to me, your speakers are not very efficient. These other speakers are much more efficient. Well, first answer is, actually they're not that much more efficient because they're not being fully truthful with their what they say is the efficiency of the speaker. But also, okay, they're more efficient, but you're losing part of the music. I say, if the more efficient you make the speaker, the less amplifier power you need. Okay. Or you can play much louder for a given amplifier. Okay. How often do you actually play really loud? Not that often.
In a home environment, very difficult to do so.
Exactly. How often do you need to hear the bass to know everything about the piece of music?
Yeah,
all the time.
All the time.
So would you rather sacrifice something all the time for something that you only need part of the time? Mm-hmm. So my answer is lower the efficiency, give you more bass.
So it's always going to be a compromise.
It's always going to be a compromise.
Yeah.
So I make my choice.
Yeah.
My choice.
And it's why you designing the speaker, and it's why it's
Yes.
an AndrewJones speaker. You took those decisions to get the speaker.
Yes.
There.
And I think that's partly why I've been successful with affordable speakers, because I do make that choice, and therefore, if you listen on headphones, you got all the bass that you need. You don't feel it, but you can hear it. Most car systems, because it's a small closed environment, much easier to produce low bass than is in a room like this. So maybe in other environments, you've been hearing that bass, and then you get your low-cost stereo system. Where did it all go? So that is something that I will say characterizes one of my goals always. So you've got the voice, and then you've got that lower mid-range balance for the voice to give it the right amount of warmth, combined with the bass extension.
That's good. I think that's a good way to define your speakers. Now, let's go back to your source point range, right? So I'm just going to ask basic questions that I get asked every day. Basically, we have the 8, we have the 10, and the 888. For different room sizes, like, would you give us for each of them? Can you? I know it's not accurate. It's not exact science, but what would you recommend for different sizes, your different speakers?
Well, the first question is, do I have to give you in square meters or square feet?
Square meters would be awesome. Otherwise, we can always translate it afterwards and put it in the subtitles.
I can't mix. If I'm going to give it in square meters, I should be calling it the source point 25, and the source point 20, and the source point 20.
Yeah. But you've told me before the interview that you're bilingual when it comes to imperial and metric system, don't you?
Yes. I mean, I told you the one example of working within Pioneer, but in America. The Japanese engineers worked in metric, and the American engineers worked in imperial. And not only imperial, but fractions. And so it was a 16th of an inch is 0.0625 fraction of an. And they would, they were always writing it as fractions. And Japanese, can you put it decimal? Okay, 16.0625. Do you really want it to 4 significant places? No, but you've written it to sort of 4 significant places. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, I bet. So metric then.
I think often you can be too specific and worrisome about what size room do speakers work in. Part of it is driven by this concept that you can't produce low bass in a small room because it won't fit the wavelength. This is just wrong. The physics of that, well, physics is right. The characterization of the physics that are responsible is totally wrong. You put sound out into a room and it obviously bounces back and forward, and at certain frequencies where it matches the dimension, you get standing waves. So you get moving waves. But at the very low frequencies, you're pressurizing the room. And if you close the doors and windows, you can almost get DC let's say 1 hertz. You can produce 1 hertz in a room because it's a pressure thing rather than a travelling wave. But you still perceive that as pressure that the ear responds to. So you can create bass in small rooms. So even a big speaker can work in small rooms. Now the question is, with positioning, do you get particular bass emphasis? And the most difficult thing of a speaker in a room is trying to position it to get the best bass performance. It involves moving the speakers around, moving the listener around. And you can do remarkably well, almost regardless of size, if you know how to do that. When I launched this in Exponor, it was a very small room, about 14 feet. So 4 meters, 4 and a bit meters wide, and maybe 6 to 7 meters deep, and standard 2.8 meters. I know height of room easily because it's standard 2.8 meters. I got fantastic bass out of it. So that's a relatively small room for a relatively big speaker. You just need to take care. So I typically don't say a speaker is either too big or too small, other than if the speaker is a small speaker, it takes more movement to create the bass in that size room. You don't get as much help from the room for a small speaker. And so you won't overall be able to play loud enough because you can't put enough energy into the room. So I tend to think the opposite way round, that you can get good bass from big speakers in a small room, and not so good small speakers in a big room.
So you're saying that there's no, I mean, it matters more the room and the positioning of the speakers within that room.
Yes, I think one of the big factors we forget about, especially from an upgrade point of view, audiophiles are always looking to upgrade to do better. And definition of an audiophile is someone who's never happy with their system.
That's a good one.
And
I think a lot of people will feel identified with that.
So you want to upgrade. And it's always, well, what's the next piece of equipment that will give me better sound? Well, the next piece is sail home and get a better home with a better listening room. Well, that's an expensive
that
upgrade.
Like
I get that one. So let's step back from that. What can you do to your room to improve it? Or the interface between speaker and room. As a speaker designer, you've got to know about rooms, because you can't hear a speaker unless it's in a room. Well, you can put it out in the field, but you don't listen like that, and it would sound awful. So we do design speakers knowing that they are going in rooms. And actually one interesting point is the difference between a pro speaker, a pro monitor, let's say, and a home speaker. Pretty much, at least traditionally, most studios where you create the music are in acoustically treated rooms. Most speakers, when you listen to them, are in acoustically untreated rooms. And that means a speaker you design for a studio is not going to sound correct in a home, and vice versa. So this idea that, if I buy the same speaker as they mixed the music on, I can hear what they were hearing. No, you won't, because you're in a different acoustic environment, and the acoustic environment has a huge impact on the sound, not just in the low bass or the mid bass, but everywhere, because it's reverberant. Voices can sound very hard in bare, untreated rooms. If you take a room with no rugs, but you've got, let's say, a wooden floor, hard walls, hard ceiling, lots of windows, it will sound much brighter and more confused. Think about it this way. We all know what signal to noise ratio is. And we say that once a signal drops below the noise, we can no longer hear it. think of a room as the noise in the signal, because we put out the music from the speaker. It comes to us. We hear that first part of music. Then we hear the early reflections. And if they're early enough, they fuse together with the direct sound. But beyond a certain time, they become reverberation. Now, we want reverberation in a church, let's say. If we're playing music in a church, we write the music in such a way that it will work within that strong reverberation characteristic. Music halls, the reverberation characteristic is critical to giving the sound of the hall. And we used to do it by trial and error. Then acousticians thought they knew what they were doing in the 50s, but we started designing really bad concert halls, and it's taken decades to get back to knowing how to design good sounding concert halls. But the acoustics are important. Once that reverberation gets too strong for certain types of music, you can't hear the clarity in the music. It's swamped by the acoustic. So imagine that the sound after that fusing point is just noise, because the music has moved on to a new part in the music, but the reverberation is from seconds before. So it's now not correlated, and it's just noise. So as your music starts to die down, it disappears into this noise, and we lose it. We lose the fine detail in that music. And it's a different way of thinking about it, but it's a critical part to say, yes, we don't want room reverberation to be too high. So we need to be treating the room.
Yeah. Now, that seems to be the conclusion. Guys, treat your rooms, please, before spending.
But it's nice to say that.
Yeah.
You know, just treat your room.
Yeah.
Stop buying new hi-fi. Maybe that's not the message I should be sending out.
No, that's not the message. No. It's getting the right hi-fi ball, so consider in your room.
Look at the treatment in this room.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Buy some treatment. Now, the downside of that is, even though we try, most room treatment looks like room treatment, unless you do something like this behind us. That's the way we should be doing. But we do need something like that, or at least the right degree of soft furnishing can help. Curtains or drapes can help. It's just we're not taught to think that way. One of the things I like to do is, on the computer, go to all these different websites of audiophile societies or whatever, and especially when people show off their systems, I don't look at the equipment. I look at what room it's in and where they've placed it in the room. And I realise that it's one thing to say, you've got to treat your room. But I also realise that for a lot of people, that's not so practical, especially speaker placement.
Yeah.
They've got furniture in the way, they've got doors in the way. You can't get the optimal
partners
position.
In the way.
And so suppose you've got a nice leather couch. That's not good because it reflects, it doesn't absorb. Soft furnishings absorb. And the first thing I did in my listening room that I built when I joined MoFi, I got this huge sectional sofa. It sleeps 3 people. No, I don't take naps in the afternoon. Yes, I don't take naps in the afternoon. But it made a huge difference.
Yeah, of course.
And so I tried to treat my room in ways that look more like interior design rather than slapping things on the wall. And I think people need to learn that, because it can, for relatively low cost, it's a great starting point to upgrading. And then, as you upgrade the equipment, you'll really start to hear the improvements you get from that equipment. The room will place a limit on your happiness of upgrading.
Yeah, fair.
And we don't want to kind of spend all this money upgrading and go, I mean, it's better, but I hoped it would be that better. That puts you off buying upgrades.
Yeah, if the room is not right, basically.
Yeah, so ultimately it's helpful that your first upgrade is treat the room, and then you're in a position to move upwards.
You heard it from AndrewJones. Ahora, hablando de las nuevas generaciones, más concreto la gente joven, ¿cómo ves el futuro de la alta fidelidad? So this I find an interesting question, since I consider myself part of this new generation. Nowadays, how within the hi-fi industry, you know, with all the younger people that are coming to encounter what hi-fi is, they're probably used to a small Bluetooth speaker or something like that. How do you see the future of hi-fi given the new generations? Because the old generations, they're sold on it, and they're still probably the biggest buyers. But how about the younger generation? How do you see it? How do you see the future of hi-fi?
I think the real problem is, let's say, outreach. Mm-hmm. And not just about the younger generation, but also all the people we don't sell to. We're good at selling to the people who come into the store. What about all the people who never come into a store? How do we reach them? So that includes the young people. Mm-hmm. And I think that we grew up in a generation where there weren't as many distractions, let's say. And hi-fi really was king. You know, it's who's got the biggest, baddest hi-fi system. You go to college and you've got speakers so big that they don't fit in the room, so you put the bed on top of the speakers, that kind of action. And you sit and listen, and you don't do anything else. I will say young people are too distracted for that. They've learnt to be distracted, learnt to switch between doing different things, listening to music, one song at a time, and then go, oh, what else do I want to listen to? Whereas, for example, albums, vinyl, you put an album together with songs in a particular order that musically meant something and emotionally meant something. Or you had a concept album, Dark Side of the Moon, for example. With music being so accessible these days, in one way we lose the value of the music in a particular way. And vinyl sort of fixes that because it becomes a ritual. And I know it wasn't specifically the question about vinyl, but it brings it in because vinyl has suddenly become popular with younger people. We never imagined that was actually going to happen. And part of why vinyl, let's sort of sound as though I'm vinyl sounds better, let's say, because we devote our attention to it. Right? Regardless of whether it is or is not technically better.
Okay.
Don't care. But it forces into a different way of listening. And how receptive we are to what we're listening to is very important. If we look at work that's been done on listener preferences and the science of which sounds better and controlling variables, which I mentioned earlier, because variable we control for is you can't see the speaker, you can't know anything about it. You've got to be these ABX testing so that all you're listening to is the difference in sound. You don't know anything about the speaker, you don't know price, you don't know what it looks like. We don't actually buy like that. We buy knowing the price, largely speaking, and what it looks like. That then influences what we think the sound is. And so we say, from a science point of view, that's wrong. But from a human point of view, it's what happens. So vinyl puts you into a mood that you had to make a deliberate attempt to set aside time that you're going to find. You're not just going to click and do a word search and, your vinyl starts playing. You got to go looking through that. Oh, I feel like this. Take it out, look at it, clean it, put it on, maybe put the record weight on, cue it up, go and sit down, start playing it. And very difficult to just listen to one song. You're going to be listening to the side and then turn it over. So, regardless of whether it is or is not technically superior medium for transmitting the music, it's often an emotional, much superior process.
Because it sets the environment for you to pay all your attention to music. In a way, you would say that in such a fast pace where when it comes to music, images, video, then it kind of is like the slowing down of the senses in a way.
Yes.
It is, you take the time, and it's we see the resurgence of hi-fi bars as well all over the world. I think it can be part of it as well. Like people just want to go to that place where it's not just a DJ and they're just talking to somebody else over the background music.
Yes.
It's actually going to a place and actually putting a record and listen to it.
And turning the lights out like we used to do, so there's again no distractions. And like you said, your friends, you play something to a friend, and then they start talking, and you go, "No, you're not supposed to be talking. Please listen. I'm trying to show you something." Yeah. And so I think that distraction is factored into. There's too many other things to do, and they're losing the value of really what's in the music. And I don't even. I mean, maybe I'm peculiar. I am peculiar, but the idea of casually listening to music, having it on in the background while you're doing it, I don't do that. I just think if I want to listen to music, I'm going to listen to music. There's been an effort put into creating it, so why not get the full value of it? And so that includes just picking around. Obviously, when I'm selecting music for shows and whatever, I'm picking around, and when I'm playing music at shows, I'm not playing a whole album, because if you pick the wrong piece of music, people are going to walk out because they don't want to hear more than that one track. But when I'm at home, I want to just sit without distractions. So I think almost teaching people how to listen, how to extract value from music, emotional value, more than they are now, is one factor. But I think also recognizing, I guess, what the habits are of younger people. And I'm saying you shouldn't just play one track at a time. Well, they are going to. So I recognize I'm maybe being impractical. Right. Although we managed to do it, maybe it can be taught, but then you have to give up some of the things which we didn't have. So it's...
But it's not only the habits. I think it's also what you were mentioning about really appreciating the time that an artist or a producer has taken into making this album, and they can spend days on one single track or more than that. And then our habits of listening, it comes, I'll just put my Bluetooth speaker, everything comes from one single point instead of listening into a stereo imaging, how the producer intended.
Actually, that's another point, that there's value in stereo imaging that most people don't even know exists. What I've started doing with the room I have is bringing in people, because I can, and it's local to me. It's not just it is my workplace, but it's not just my workplace. I do relax in there and enjoy it. And I can just invite people in who know nothing about hi-fi, but people in the spa unit above me, this kind of thing. And I can sit them down and play them something, and they have no understanding that was possible. Mm-hmm. And it opens up their ears to that this is possible. Even musicians haven't heard it that way. Brought in, there's a music producer that we met recently. She was responsible for a new movie that's called The Greatest Hits. And it's basically a time travel love story music, but it's based about listening to music on vinyl with vintage hi-fi systems, and it's time travel. it's the perfect movie for all us hi-fi nerds. So we met up with the premiere, and then I said, come along and listen to my system. And they produced a limited edition double album of the music that was used in the movie. So I played her this track, and it turned out, fortuitously, it was her favourite piece of music that had been written for the movie. I watched, she was almost crying because she hadn't understood that her favourite piece of music that she'd been involved with in the movie could sound like that. Mm-hmm. And those experiences are really magical when you can see that happening to somebody. Or you take these people who've no idea how to describe what they just heard in the way that a hi-fi enthusiast would. Yeah. Oh, the bass was a bit lumpy, but it's tight in these, and that mid-range, no, that's a bit recessed.
That one is a bit top-heavy.
Yeah, it's their emotional reaction. Yeah. It's both hearing everything that was in, I didn't know that instrument was doing that counterpoint to this, or they just start going, makes me want to cry. Those are amazing experiences, and I think we should be thinking more in terms of how to communicate that concept to people. I want to make you cry, right? How about that as an opening gambit? I actually, again, I always go off topic, but I have this friend who's a TAD dealer in Sweden. And Jörgen is one of these people that just goosebumps when he hears the right piece of music, or he'll start crying. So my goal became, I'm going to find music to make Jörgen cry. So every time I would be meeting up with him, I'd be armed with new pieces of music. And one time it was, we were at his store with all his friends prior to going up to Stockholm for a show. And I'd got one particular piece of music. And in front of his friends, I made him cry. So goal number one. Then the second chance with the second piece of music was at the show. I was going to save it to embarrassing him, not just in front of friends, but random people in an audience. And I played this particular track, and I knew this particular note is the one that sends you over the top. Sure enough, she didn't do that, and he actually got up and walked out. And that particular album, it's Ann-Sofie von Otter, who was a Swedish opera singer, singing with Elvis Costello on an album. Kind of, what a weird thing to have discovered. And it starts with this cello, and then the voice comes in, and then later on Elvis Costello. So it was a great piece, but it's finding those opportunities to emotionally involve people. So the next year doing the show, he'd set up, each room was about the size of this one here, but there were two rooms. One he set up as a recording venue, piano, cello, and voice. And we brought in two recording engineers, to record it in their own way. One was multi-track, close microphones, the other was mics out in the room to analog tape. And we could play that back and show people how different the music would sound based on the choice of the engineer. And yet it's exactly the same performance. But during one of the breaks, we were talking about this, and I was making my jokes about making Jörgen cry. And I was describing this particular album with the cello. The cellist says, I know that album. I am that cellist. And it turned out that during the recording session there was a break, so he was just keeping warmed up. And playing this particular piece of music, and Ann-Sofie von Otter came over and said, I love that piece of music, what is it? It's a piece I wrote. And she said, I'd love to sing that on the album. He says, well, there are no words, it's just a musical piece. And he said, could I have Elvis Costello write some words to it? And he did, and that's how it happened. I live for those moments. But anyway, back to the main thing.
Yeah.
So, trying to get young people involved. They're already fascinated with vinyl. For some, it's, oh, I'm going to put it up on the wall. It looks cool. We won't translate everybody who's buying vinyl right now into hi-fi enthusiasts. But at least we stand a better chance maybe than we have in the past. And so it's how do we engage those people? How do we show them what satisfaction they can get from music? And this idea that they've never heard a good system, and when they do, you can barely believe it, and they have a full emotional reaction. That's what we've got to be able to show.
Yeah.
And I don't fully know how to do it, but I think that's the key. And never talk technical about it. That won't get them into it unless they're geek like.
You gotta show them. I mean, I see it every day. They were like, when I'm doing demonstrations, especially when it's someone my age, me, because I'm lucky, I started in this industry and so I know about it, but then there's people that come to the store, they want to listen to a system, but they don't, like you said, they don't understand the concept of what a good system for listening is, and they don't know that it can sound so good. Even though they know the speakers exist, they know that there are pro speakers that sound really good, but when it comes to like, they're not aware of it. Them, but and I think like you're saying, vinyl is a good opportunity to bring them into the hi-fi industry. Maybe we won't get all of them because they're not all of them doing them from the right reason. Well, the reason that we're expecting. But it's just, I think it's maybe exposing younger people to more of this kind of system, because most of them, I would dare to say, under 30 years old, they don't know what a hi-fi system is.
Exactly.
Especially here in Spain. At least I'm talking from my experience in Spain, but I could translate this to the UK as well, for example, when I was working there. I would encounter the same.
And that was, again, what's nice about this system. All the friends I have or acquaintances, they have an idea of what I do. I keep telling them. I design speakers for hi-fi systems. They go, okay. But without... Now I can readily show them what I can do. And it changes them in realizing how fun or cool or emotional this can be. And we also have to stop discounting certain classes of people, like kids or women or whatever, that we just disregard them as often as potential clients, let's say, especially at hi-fi shows in America. It's just old guys. And if anyone dares bring a family into a demo room in America, it's almost all these guys are going, why are those kids here? And they're giving them dirty looks. Well, that's our future. So I think that's the key, the emotional part. Obviously we can't replace all these other interests, but at least maybe we can get people to understand from the music point of view, there's more than just casually listening.
Totally.
And show them that partly it's, even if they sort of casually listening, if the systems that they're listening over don't fully show all what's in the music, then maybe even if they're only listening at one song at a time, but they hear more from that song to appreciate what's in there. Because there's got to be some reason they liked it in the first place. But we can show them there's so much more, then, again, they might get interested. It's how do you communicate an experience without giving a direct experience?
Correct.
That's the difficult part. I can say till the cows come home what it can do, but without a direct experience of that, it's just words.
Yeah, completely. And honestly, I find it really sad that some people don't know what a good system is, and they have never listened to one. Honestly, I find it sad.
I could talk to so many more people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you were saying about your friends, I've been working in hi-fi for 8 years. Still, I get friends asking like, can you get me a microphone? I'm like, no, that's not what, that's not what, they don't grasp it until you show them. This is how it's supposed to sound. This is what I work for, and this is a good sound system.
And it works for both people who are into playing and recording music, that they don't know how good it can sound when you correctly capture everything. You know, home studios, yeah, it's great in expanding who can be involved in music, but it's very poor for really communicating fully what that music can be. Because if you haven't had mentorship, you know, I keep coming back to the mentorship I had. The more studios close down, the less mentorship you have available. And you don't move very far forward if every generation has to start from scratch. You know, I see that even with speaker design. It sounds like I'm an old codger saying this kind of thing, but I've had this chance to learn all this stuff, and there's all this wealth of knowledge that people don't even know where to access it. And so they keep asking the same questions over and over, different generations coming in, and go and read, go and study. Yeah.
Study. We should get like a worldwide, I don't know, platform for people to access to all this information. Maybe you can help us with that. Could be a collaboration.
It's called a library.
Oh, right, fair. All right, I haven't seen one of those in ages, man.
It's not Google.
It's not Wikipedia. Is that what you mean?
Well, no. It's just like Google. You know, I was always told. Again, Laurie Finchen, my mentor. First of all, stop looking where the light is, which is a very powerful statement. You're only looking where you're shining the light. That's a very small part of where all the information is. At least shine it around. And the other factor was, when you're doing research, especially from journals, you'll order, let's say you know there's going to be an article in a particular journal that you've been referenced to. So you start flicking through the journal. And my professor, when I was doing research, he said, the most interesting article might not be the one you asked for, it's the one on the preceding page. As you flick through, you suddenly say, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I didn't think about thinking of it like that. And you know, I've got a great collection of either papers I've photocopied, journals that I've got on the shelf. I will often just grab a pile and go, there's a reason I photocopied those articles and kept them. What was it? And I'll just keep going through them. And, oh, I'd forgotten about that idea. That's cool. Whereas when you do targeted searches, all you get is targeted answers, a very narrow selection. If it's too wide, you think, well, this search engine is not very good. Right? Well, maybe you should use less competent search engines. You might find some peripheral information that is valuable to you. Yeah. See, I'm fixing the world. Not just designing speakers.
Oh, nice. Well, Andrew, I don't know you, but if it were me, I could spend all day just talking to you and picking your brains on more technical stuff. And but we need probably a 5-hour YouTube video more or something.
I'm game.
Okay, we'll probably carry on this after. I mean, when we're not on camera. But yeah, it's been great to have you here. Honestly, being a pleasure, man. To meet you. You always talk about AndrewJones. Whoa. Who was going to say I'll end up meeting him and interviewing him. First time I did an interview, by the way. So, well, here at Super Sonido, you know, this is your house. You're always welcome here. And I'm hoping that you're enjoying your time in Spain.
You know, I do have to say, that, really from the heart, that everybody here at Super Sonido, I've had such great fun here and great food, and that means something special coming from me with my food tastes. It's been fantastic, so I'm always happy to come back.
Nice one. So we'll have to have you here, man. Yeah. Next time.
Yeah?
Yeah. You better come here again. Bueno, hasta luego. Nos vemos en otro vídeo.